Welcome to Business Talk on Business Tech with me, Michael Avery, and we're talking about something that really has evolved through this pandemic, and we're scratching around to figure out what this new future is going to look like. And during COVID, I think a number of things have stood out. Firstly, societies around the world lauded key workers, our healthcare workers, our logistics, food retail, refuse management, all of those who worked throughout the pandemic just to keep society functioning, often putting themselves in harm's way to do so. And I think secondly, as millions of office workers have been working from home, tucked away safely from the virus, there has been a groundswell of debate about whether this trend is going to endure. Is remote working finally going to be a mainstream aspect of working life? And as we investigate what this post-COVID future of work might look like, a report conducted by NTT showing that business leaders and employees disagree fundamentally on the future of work really stands out because it runs to the core and the heart of the issue. I'm joined by Wortmann, who's head of applications for Southern Africa at Dimension Data NTT. Lauren, it's great to have you on the show, and I think a very timely bit of research this. Where are the weak points in this current workplace dynamic that are impacting delivery and customer service? Let's start at that point.
Hi, good afternoon, Michael, and thank you to you and your listeners for having me on your show. I think the most telling and obvious finding from a weak point perspective in the report is this disconnect between executives, operational managers, and employees. It's a reoccurring theme across all dimensions that were looked at, and burnout, culture, policy, and the different approaches to working models definitely came through as highlights from a weak point perspective. In addition, one thing that came out quite clearly was the disconnect and gaps from the detail around the current workplace dynamic, tools, and enablement to allow this hybrid working model as well as enable the future way of work. Something else that we saw when we had a look at the findings was absolutely the talent deficit that has been caused and the friction around not enabling a new way of work for employees and what that's meant around talent retention. So those are some of the findings that were highlighted from a weak point perspective. And I think in addition, one thing that came up very clearly, and this is quite positive, was the shift from employee productivity towards, a focus on employee well-being. So that was quite encouraging, that there is the focus, but on the negative side, it absolutely highlighted the impact that the pandemic has had on the overall well-being of employees across the globe.
Wow, it sounds like you're reading out of my personal playbook here, because I'm one of those personality types that I'd struggle to say no. And what I do is I take on more work, and because we can work remotely, we're just doing more and more things. And if I don't have someone who's out there saying, Michael, I think you just sailing a little bit close to that burnout, wind here. Maybe you just need to step back. I would just carry on going. And I think increasingly that's going to be the big challenge for managers here, how to keep tabs on your remote teams to ensure that they're not doing exactly that. What do you see as the future? I mean, we all want to peer into the crystal ball here, and we want to know what the future of this modern workplace is going to look like. What do you see it looking like? Is it hybrid? And how do you see it impacting South African businesses?
I think the first thing that we can all absolutely agree on is that the face of the workplace has completely changed, and it's changed forever. And that's brought with it, some positive elements as well as, some negative elements. Again, like I mentioned earlier, you've got this conflict between, how organizational executives are seeing the future and how employees are seeing the future. What came through clearly was that, when you interview executives around what the future looks like, almost 80% of them felt that employees would prefer to return to the office. But when you poll and interview the actual employees, we started to see a 30-30-30 split. So 30% of employees, wanting to come back to the office, around 30% wanting, a hybrid workforce around work from home some days, work from the office other days, and then another 30% wanting to remain and work from home. So for me, that absolutely points to the two main elements. The one for me is that there will absolutely be a hybrid element, that we need to get closer to our employees as business leaders in South Africa, and really bridge that disconnect around what we believe our employees want and what our employees actually want. So we'll find the balance there in terms of what the future way of work looks like. One other element that's become really, really clear. So while we'll have hybrid workforce, and I mentioned this shift from productivity to well-being, and the focus on well-being really means that employees are, outside of their salary, they are absolutely influenced in terms of who they choose to work for. Looking at stuff like work-life balance, they're looking for quite flexible work hours, quick commute to the office, and then a lot of purpose and values come through. So looking towards a company vision and purpose and values as a motivator to how they select an employer of choice. So lots of different factors at play here. It will change. It will absolutely be hybrid. But that being said, exactly how it's going to look is quite unclear. And there's a gap in terms of what are those strategies and what are those plans around enabling the future way of work for us in South Africa. I think what is important from a South Africa perspective is we've got quite a lot of global data, but there's quite a specific South African context that we need to look at. So, we think about the rise in cybercrime that we've seen over the past couple of months with the likes of, Transnet Ports Authority. When we have a look at load shedding, I'm sure you can identify it as most of the listeners will be able to. But when working from home and not being equipped or having the privilege to have solar or a UPS and generate backup power, that absolutely has an impact in terms of how we work. So they're quite specific South African elements that have to be considered. And I think importantly, the cost of data. Well, we've seen, the cost of data come down when we have a look at, the financial pressures that organizations are under, as well as the pressures that people are under financially. And, how do you really start balancing the requirement for power and data that's cost effective at home? So
all of those expenses, I mean all of those costs that were borne by the company have now been shifted over onto the employee's personal balance sheet. Working from home, running the air conditioning through winter or summer to kind of heat or cool. The data issue is a big one, and whether or not you've got a backup in a 3G dongle, well, do the towers in the area have backup power? I've had that so many times where even the best laid backup plans that you have fall over, and it increases the anxiety, doesn't it? And that's what you were talking about as well earlier, this ability to be able to work in a way that you're not adversely impacting overall employee well-being. So what can be done to address the current confidence in employers and overall employee happiness there?
Michael, when having a look at the data, it's really underwhelming and quite disappointing, I think, for organizations if you really have a look at the mirror around what employees are saying. 38% of employees, really only 38%, believe that that organization or their employers fully value their health and mental well-being, and only 23% of employees are really happy and fulfilled and working for their employer. So we're coming off a really low base in terms of confidence and overall happiness working for organizations. There's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of uncertainty, specifically over the last 2 years. I think you combine that with some of our, challenges that we faced as South Africa over the past couple of months. You can understand why there's a lot of anxiety in the system. What we are seeing is that individuals definitely want more control and more choice over where and how they work. It's a definite shift from, what is the output that I give you, rather than a focus on, working from 8 until 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Definitely what is needed, and I guess what is positive, is we certainly seeing this with a number of key organizations, is quite an intentional focus and investment around employee experience. So where traditionally the focus has very much been, okay, how do we invest and improve customer experience? The realization that employee experience has a direct impact on that and performance. We're starting to see some real investment and commitment from organizations in terms of addressing that. But still not enough is being done. Importantly, how do you incorporate the voice of the employee in a much more regular cadence? Often you have an annual or biannual, employee net promoter score survey that would be sent out, or really big surveys. Definitely not frequent enough. So how do you start getting a bit of pulse of of what's going on the ground, how your employees are feeling, and then importantly, what are the actions that are being put in place to then address it? So listening to employees, and then also putting the actions in place to address those.
Sounds like what William Mzimba, the CEO of Vodacom Business, was telling me several months ago. I think this was last year, and just coming out of the first lockdown. And they had migrated everyone across to Teams. Everyone was working remotely. But he said he was really concerned about the impact that this is going to have on employee well-being, and also just being isolated. And are you left to your own devices on the tech front, for example, and you feel like you're drowning. So what he implemented was a weekly touch base. Just half an hour, everyone got together, and the technology is there to do it. And so I guess it's up to you as to how often you do it, but annual, biannual, that's certainly no longer fit for purpose. When it comes to the digital transformation element, I mean, that's one thing that we've seen. The fact that we could survive through this pandemic, I think, is largely on the back of the technology. We wouldn't have been able to do this 10 or 15 years ago. So it clearly has helped. Where is it thriving? Where is it struggling, though? Where are we potentially falling down?
Anyone that's lived through this pandemic, God willing, will, I think, be able to identify with, the massive role that technology has played as an enabler, specifically for businesses in South Africa. So, what we've definitely seen, and I think something that will have longer term positive benefits, is absolutely the digital, if I use the word dexterity, that people have, and the comfort with technology that, people that have potentially been reluctant, we've been forced to adopt and get comfortable with technology, and that's at all levels of the organization. So, for me, that's really positive. When I have a look at, certainly what's been thriving is cloud. The ability to rapidly adopt new technologies, to roll out new technologies like Microsoft Teams, anecdotally speaking to people that had kind of used Teams for chats, 2 weeks later, their organization is fully rolled out and adopted it. So, cloud's been a really big enabler around that. Automation is another key technology that's thrived and really been accelerated through the pandemic. But when we have a look at, where some of the struggles have been, security remains top of mind around, how do you secure your organization? Well, people got a lot more comfortable with technology. You've also opened up risk to your organization, as well as awareness just in terms of some of the threats, the cyber threats, from working from home. So, For me, security is probably, still a challenge that organizations need to intentionally overcome. When we think about what's been driving cloud-enabled technologies, definitely top of the list.
And I like that word, intentional, because the initial reaction and response was to just, ensure that you've got some kind of continuity. And I think everything was designed on the fly, and maybe wasn't designed in the best possible manner. And now it's probably time to go back and say, right, if this is going to be the future, if it's going to be more hybrid, then let's have a look at what a more permanent, better structured solution is going to be. Just on the point that's really come through this conversation and the research on that disconnect, and just to leave the audience with a bit of a toolkit here on how they can tackle this disconnect that's resulted in these disagreements and the shift in employee needs. Where's a good place to start?
I think going back to one of the themes that we've spoken about on the words is you need to be quite intentional around what you're doing here, Michael, as an organization in South Africa. The way of work and the future and the shape of work has changed. It's changed forever, and that's brought about both positive and negative implications for both leaders, for operational managers, as well as employees. So acknowledging that, building strategies around that, and intentionally enabling a new way of work is going to be incredibly important. When we have a look at how we address the disconnect and what we are seeing from the research, it really highlights five key ways in which to address this. So technology plays a critical role in terms of, managing this disconnect. If that is, connecting people to collaborate from a business point of view, if that's enabling employees working from home, whether that's through, power solutions or through connectivity solutions. But then also having a look at how you leverage technology to really start understanding employee well-being, productivity, and then putting strategies in place to address any shortcomings. So technology will be one that continues to play a critical role. And then the quality of collaboration, you mentioned earlier, people are able to connect. Certainly what we are seeing is that while people are able to work and connect using technology, we really need to focus on the quality of the engagement between each other and employees. I think all of us can probably identify with having sat on a call and you've got email going there, you've got your kids screaming behind you, and also really missing that human connection. So finding ways to really enable quality, employee collaboration. The word's been mentioned a number of times is really around employee well-being, and that's not necessarily a technology intervention, but people have really, really struggled, and we can all personally identify with that as we come out of this, or potentially go into the fourth wave, that if we get to grips of this being the future, we really need to start rethinking how we support employees in our organization. Security, we mentioned that in order, and this is really an organizational imperative. If you look at the impact of cybercrime and not securing your organization, we need to ensure that we enable employees to make smart decisions when it comes to security, but also at the enterprise level, make sure that we have the tools and technology and process to enable that. And then where possible, people are looking for a better work-life balance. When we start talking about automation and, digitizing processes and workflows, just really creating more meaningful work where possible for employees. So those are really five of the key, insights that came through in terms of how do we bridge that disconnect.
Well, it's a great toolkit with which to start approaching and tackling this future workplace that we are busy building as we jumped out of the plane in the middle of this pandemic, and reimagining this future as we plummet to Earth. Hopefully, it'll be a safe landing for most of you. You've got the parachutes, you've got the tools, and it is all about ensuring that there is the human element. I love the fact that we spoke about technology, and obviously you're a technology company, but the human element is so important about putting people at the center and well-being, and that all comes and boils down to leadership as well. So Lauren, thank you so much. Who knows, in the not too distant future we'll be able to have this in a metaverse type environment as well, which will be a slightly more immersive experience and help us make those connections as well. Lauren Wortmann, Head of Applications for Southern Africa Dimension Data, NTT. Thanks so much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Michael.